Hi cats and kittens, it's Amy from Save or Salvage Scent. I hope you are doing great. I'm going to continue today a short series that I am calling Authenticity and Signature Scents. The first installment was beginning of my perfume wearing years, my high school years, and I'm going to continue today and talk about, for me, my college years. And then I think I'll do 2 more installments. One after that will be early post-college, when I really start to dive into perfume collecting more. And after that, I think I will talk about more recent signature scents. So essentially, I got to thinking about this. I was listening to Dr. Gabor Mate, and he was talking about the connection of living authentically, being your authentic self, and contentment, happiness, health, etc. And I was thinking about my relationship with perfume and how lucky I've been to try so many things. I'm going to continue, I think, to try things. Right now, I'm kind of on a low or no buy, but I'm itching and enjoying getting back to kind of my signature scents. Signature scents, I think, used to be, or at least to my parents, you wore one perfume all year, or you maybe even wore 1 or 2 or 3 perfumes over a lifetime. I still think, though, for us collectors, there are ones that we think really represent us, represent certain times in our life, really satiate something, and we perhaps keep going back to. And today, again, I'm going to talk about my college years, which are, I graduated from high school in 1989. I graduated from college sometime between 1996 and 97. I know for a lot of people, college is a 4-year fast track. It was not for me. The biggest reason being I came from a family that didn't have a ton of money, and I mostly supported myself through college, so that meant I worked a lot. I also got up to some shenanigans, and I changed my major a couple times, sorry. So I'm going to talk about my relationship with perfume during that time. First, I'm gonna, like last video, I'm gonna give a little bit of context, or at least what that time was like to me, and how I think those times influenced perfume. So one of the things that I really realized as I was thinking back on this was I did not have a lot of access to money. I worked my tail off. I often worked 3 jobs through college. However, I both had to take out loans, and I had to rely on my own income to pay for books, sometimes some of my college and my rent and that kind of thing. I hope it's okay. For a few minutes, I am literally going to read off a list of things that I was thinking about as far as how 1989 through 96 looked to me. Some of the things that happened in the news, a lot about music, because that's a huge part of my life, trends, fashion, and how I think that influenced perfume. So in no particular order, I wrote down grunge, punk, DIY, rap, hip hop, indie. I think when I was in high school, I mean, we were starting to see some independent perfume makers, but really, for me at least, I didn't see a lot of that until I was in college. But that's where it really started to happen. I wrote down activism. I mean, it was some of the first activist times in my life, but I think about even companies like the Body Shop or Lush. I mean, I really think that was part of their identity, to be like, we're doing this differently than major companies. Here's how. And I think even the scents were somewhat influenced by, you know, an independent spirit in that way, or an activist spirit. And again, I wrote down so little money, yet we figured it out. I also remember distinctly that, of course, there have been gourmand elements in perfumes since the beginning. I mean, there have been things like vanilla and tonka, sometimes have been used in gourmand ways. However, those were just elements, at least in my experience. I can remember the literal day that it was 1991 and I was at a friend's house. This one guy was like a skater guy, and he smelled great. And we were like, gosh, you smell so good. What's up? He said, I'm wearing vanilla oil. And we were like, what? Come again? Had never heard of such vanilla, like the stuff you bake with? Yeah, but it's oil. It's from the Body Shop too. What? I mean, this was like revolutionary. And it wasn't until years later that I feel like other companies were really doing like edible scents like that. Something that was pivotal for me was so much to do with music and the grunge kind of thing happening. It's hard to express when something hadn't existed, how transformative that thing was in context. And I can remember being in college, and this guy we knew had gone to Seattle and then moved back. And I remember he and his girlfriend were like walking down the street, and we were like, what's up with Matt? And he had on, I'll never forget, a sock hat. His hair was like down to here. This was a big, in high school, all the guys' hair was short. This guy, beat up sweater, but beautiful, these beautiful colors, layers, flannel shirts, really cool boots, a look, like such a, and I remember us being like, wow, that is really cool and different. Sadly, with that, the person I'm talking about also had come back fresh out of rehab, had never heard of, well, I'm not going to say the particular drug before or drugs, but in came, at least into my life, I know many have had it before or after, you know, drugs that put you into rehab. So that's a big memory for me. And then something that was really transformative for me, my sister Ruthie was my best friend, still very close. However, I grew up with her, and she even raised me at times, and she moved to Seattle. And so I went to visit her a few times, and I mean, it was like going to the grunge mecca, right? And so that was like really, really transformative. And again, I'm going to add some pictures here and there. Also, hip hop, Public Enemy, rap, huge, big deal. I think about bands like Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, Public Enemy, other bands that were really influential from my beginning to end of college. Coming out of high school, Jane's Addiction, Devo. I'm from Akron, so Devo continues to be a huge deal in my life. REM was everything as we were graduating high school and going into college. That, actually, we just like worshipped them. We thought they were the coolest. Afghan Wigs, Ian McCullough, a lot of noise bands like Hammerhead. I have to just give props to Laughing Hyenas. Again, one of the first grunge bands I saw, a woman playing, hardcore music. I'm gonna put a picture below. Sadly, again, one of my idols who died of addiction. Something else I really remember from my college days are just Betsey Johnson. Like, her as a designer, her dresses were everything. I wanted one so badly. I had one my whole college time. I had a little change purse. Some of my friends with a little more money came back with dresses, and frankly, they were a little thinner. Her stuff was like doll clothes at that time. Now she makes plus size clothes, which I really appreciate. But I had a particular friend who was such a good seamstress that, and we were broke, don't forget, she got one dress, somehow figured out how to buy this very expensive dress, brought it back, and made patterns, and we duped it and made dresses out of it. I mean, like, we worship Betsey Johnson. Oh, big news events. Nelson Mandela was freed. It was essentially, over this college time, the end of apartheid. Oh, Persian Gulf War, the dissolution of the USSR. I can remember so distinctly in the early 90s, sitting with my parents watching really tough news stories, one being about Rodney King being severely beaten by the LAPD on national television, never forget that. US and Russia declare the end of the Cold War, Reagan to Clinton, the first Trade Center bombing. And then I go back to music, of course, thinking about grunge, Nirvana, bands like the Melvins, Alice in Chains. I'm going to suggest a couple of videos in case I just think they absolutely paint a picture of the time. One is, if you Google Nirvana, the Reading Festival, there was, not only was it to me one of the best concerts ever, but I think there was such an interesting dichotomy because they're playing this like really tough music, but there was this guy called Dancing Tony who would sometimes tour with them, who would dance his went off when they were playing. And there was something about the dichotomy of that. People literally, I think, like living on the edge, and the edge of depression, the edge of consumerism, the edge of what do I do next, the edge of addiction, the edge of the edge of musical genius and hard work. And then there's this guy dancing and flailing in the background, and it's not all happy. It's so interesting. So I think that's a really cool thing that kind of captures the time. And then another one is if you Google Alice in Chains at the Moore. The Moore is a really interesting hotel and concert hall. And I went to see a few shows there when I was to Seattle and back. But there was a particular show that Alice in Chains played, and Layne Staley, R.I.P., another idol taken by drug addiction. He gives this performance. If you Google Love, Hate, Love at the Moore, it's unfathomable to see what inspires him, what comes out in this performance, but also the raw grit and talent that is just, I think, mind-blowing to people. Other things I remember are tattoos and piercings becoming such a big deal. Of course, tattoos have been around, kind of since the beginning with some cultures. But I remember tattoos and piercings becoming such, it's hard to describe, again, the context of how unpopular they were when I was in high school and graduating, and quickly what they became, especially to like alternative culture. And then it's hard to believe then how mainstream they've become since. But I'm going to put a picture below of one of my first visits to Seattle. I think I was 19 going to visit my sister, and there's a picture of me with getting my first tattoo. And just to give you an idea of how on the margin or in the margins that was at that time. So I came back and I'm working in a bookstore, and I remember I had customers tell me that I was godless. After a while, I didn't show my tattoo at work. And then over the years, I got many, and it's become so much more mainstream. But anyways, tattooing was such a big deal. I remember my friends all going to get first tattoos, fifth tattoos, 10th tattoos. And, the learning about the culture, the background, the history, etc. It just became such a big deal, and really has been since. Not only was Alice in Chains such an interesting thing, whether you loved them or not, I think they were just so talented, but it was some of the first times I experienced stuff on the internet just starting to come to the surface about like couples that are in the limelight. And there was a woman named Demri, I think her name was Parrott, who dated Layne Staley from Alice in Chains. I'm going to put a picture, but I want to talk a little more about the fashion. And I think she just was such a good example of it. But there was, again, I'm thinking about like grunge and edginess and grittiness and like literal like things torn apart and dirty and whatever, but also mixed with lace. There was a lot of florals in Betsey Johnson, really, really feminine, mixed with, it was like gender bending stuff happening again. And so these mixes of things. And one of the things that's funny to me is when it comes to fashion, I'm going to plop a few pictures of me from this time period. My hair changes like crazy. You'll see. What doesn't change is you're going to see literally like 4 or 5 examples of me wearing overalls. So it was like wearing these kind of roughed up overalls with like lace or cashmere. And most of these things, by the way, we got at the thrift store, or at least my group did. We did not have a lot of money. So I remember a lot of mixing like that. I'm thinking about bands like Dinosaur Jr., Mudhoney, again, the Melvins. And then another thing I really remember is a lot of multimedia things happening around music. So not only did we go to see bands a ton in college, but often these bands we were going to see, whether they were local or really popular, they were doing things like throwing video elements into it. We would go see bands sometimes and there would be like performances, video. Now again, I grew up seeing bands like Devo, so this wasn't absolutely new, but I started to see it so much more about this like multimedia thing. And as a person who works in the arts, I'll tell you more and more, when I was really young, people tended to choose one medium, and what we started to see more of was people wanting to not define just one medium, work within many mediums. Again, long hair on boys, girls shaving their heads. I'm thinking about Sinead O'Connor and such. I think about Dr. Dre and Snoop was like really popular during this time. I think about the dawning of Martha Stewart. I remember sitting on my college steps, coming from this family who junked and antiqued and whatever, and my sister sent me Martha Stewart's first magazine. I remember pouring through it and going, oh my God, other people are going to collect this stuff and it's going to become expensive now. But we idolized her too, because we were like, somebody who wants to DIY things and whatever. We didn't know that she had 49 minions, but you know, anyway, the band The Roots were everything. I'm so glad to see them continue on, to be given so many props, to see what Questlove and the band has done with Late Night. I listened to The Roots for years straight on my headphones walking to and from college classes. All right, so what does this all mean to perfume? Why are we talking about it? I think all these things influence perfume. I'm now going to share the scents that I wore the most these years. All of these things influence perfume. And what I think, or what I saw, was when I started college, I was wearing things like, I forgot to mention my last video, Ralph Lauren was one of the nicest first perfumes purchased for me by my sister who was in the fashion industry. And I loved that. So you think about the preppiness of Ralph Lauren and how gorgeous and pivotal that scent was, but truly like a classic, a composition, right? Something else I went into college wearing, and it was again due to my sister wore this one, I think I was still in high school. She wore this scent to a holiday party and I was like, what is that? And she bought me a bottle and then I, figured out a way to get some of my own, but Chanel Cristalle. This is a really lemony, gorgeous thing. So this was another scent that I kind of started wearing in college. But something that I saw really influenced by the music scene was the rise of independent or DIY companies or perfumers. So, or I would say even activist companies. Some of the first things I wore were made by the Body Shop. They don't make them anymore. And so I now buy kind of impressions of through Valerie's Uncommon Scents. She's terrific. But one of the scents I wore like crazy first couple years of college was Dewberry. So, this is just a very tart, almost fresh, grassy, but really tart fruit, beautiful. And I know this was like, Dewberry was such a big deal for a lot of us. I wore their vanilla oil. You can't get this stuff anymore. I don't know anybody that makes a dupe. It's wickedly expensive. You find old bottles, so I don't have any anymore. But again, that was such a big deal. It was like people are wearing vanilla. Some other scents that I sadly don't own anymore. The Gap's Grass I wore that for a year or two straight. It smelled like clean laundry and fresh cut grass. I loved that thing. Another big deal was one of my roommates in college did come from a lot of money. And she and one of her, I think a sister or friend, went on a cruise during like a college break. And she came back and her gift to us, the rest of us in the house, were a bottle of Clarins Eau Dynamisante. And I remember, because we didn't get the concept, we didn't grow up with this stuff, we were like, she brought us back deodorant, what? And I remember her saying, okay, it says deodorant, but it's really like a freshie. It's like a fresh perfume. And this was so radical. I mean, like, this to me is so gender bending. It's just fresh. It has a lot of herbs in it. It's very lemony to me. And we wore the heck out of this thing. I still do. It's one of the scents that I have worn straight through from that time. I can't get enough of it. I think this is my 4th or 5th bottle. I mean, it's relatively inexpensive, but nobody I know had this stuff at the time. She brought it back and we thought we were the you-know-what. What else did I wear? Another scent that went out of commission. And a lot of these, I think I either got as samples from my sister or, a friend introduced me to it and then I found how to get a cheap bottle or whatever. But another popular scent that I loved was YSL's Baby Doll. I'm going to put a picture of it below. Sadly went out of commission. Boy, I loved it. It was like a floral fruity and it just was perfect. It was just beautiful. The closest thing I found, for those of you who might have loved it, is Mademoiselle by Rochas. This is so darn close. Is it revolutionary now? No, but it smells almost exactly like Baby Doll, so really reminds me of those times. Another scent I absolutely adored was Versace's Blonde, and that was just a really heady, white floral in this just gorgeous bottle. I'm going to put a picture again. It was just beautiful with if it wasn't a Lalique bottle, it sure looked like one, but gorgeous. And then I'll name a few other things. Issey Miyake's first scent, I think it was first. in the triangular shaped kind of bottle. I now can't hack it, but I bought a bottle for myself because it was even affordable back then. And then my sister bought me a few and I wear that like crazy, especially during the summer. I find it to be a little screechy now. I don't wear it anymore, but boy, I loved it then. And it was, I think a lot of us wore it. And a lot of people, it still continues to work on their skin. I think it's something about my skin chemistry. Other thing I wore a lot of was Calvin Klein's Eternity. I've always been into carnation, and that was like a soapy, fresh scent with carnation. So I wore a lot of that, thought it was really beautiful. It was when I started to wear Lolita Lempicka, this beautiful licorice, gorgeous scent. And this to me, it looks to me like, and I know that Lolita Lempicka made clothes too, but this to me goes with that like floral Betsey Johnson aesthetic. And speaking of, I'm going to put some pictures of some Betsey Johnson dresses. They were just, I can't even tell you how important they were to us. They were so different than things we had grown up with. They were often like baby doll style, but they often were made out of jersey, and they often had these bold florals, mixed media. Oh gosh, we just love them. And this, I think, is kind of like that same aesthetic. Beautiful. And another thing I remember during this time, and this is probably my late college years, it was the first time I went to a Lush store. Actually, my sister, they were not in the US at that time. My sister visited one, came back, and then anytime she would go away, or I would order through catalog, and I started wearing the scent Karma, which is like, to me, the grunge aesthetic in a bottle. So it's like, it's got orange and these things that are fresh, but it's got like these piney elements and also patchouli. So it's got that grit too. Anyways, I think that really kind of captures that time. And then I'll close by saying there were two unique Goutal scents that these again were kind of expensive at the time. My sister though worked in the fashion industry, so she often would get things either through samples or through her job and kindly gift them to me. And two scents that were really pivotal during my later college years were Petite Chérie, which was this beautiful, it was a play on cherry, but it was like a fresh cherry, powdery, just gorgeous, fleeting, sadly, but just so beautiful. I should try to get my hands on another bottle, actually. And then I hope I'm saying this correctly. There was one called I think it was Adrian. And that was, to me, a gender-bending scent. It was like a freshie, kind of in the style of like 4711. But it was this gorgeous freshie that I think a lot of us wore at that time that was really important. So those are all the scents I think about from that time. I would love to hear from you. First of all, thank you so much. So many of you, I'm gonna like come to tears. So many of you commented, wrote me personally about the first video in the series about what I wore in high school and what those high school years were like. First of all, you all shared so many important pivotal experiences, the perfumes you wore. I truly felt so honored to have this personal information. And I was so moved by how kind the feedback was, how encouraging. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for being here today. Obviously, this is very personal, but you know, how else can we talk about signature scents without talking about our own experiences? But I'd love to hear from you. So many of you shared what you wore during your high school years. I'd love to hear what you wore the first 5 or 10 years out of high school or in your 20s, what were important to you. Thank you so much for being here. Can't wait to talk again. Have a great rest of your day. Cheers.